Welcome to the American Academy of Environmental Engineers webinar. My name is Dan Other. I'm the Executive Director of the Academy, and I'm excited to be one of your speakers today. I'm joined by Israel Hodges. Hi, Israel. Good to see you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
We're really glad to have you here. First of all, just a few housekeeping items. Remember, as we do these webinars, we're always looking for questions and comments that would come in that we can address throughout the webinar, primarily at the end. So please do make sure those questions and comments come in. Remember that the webinar series for members of the Academy is free. It's free for students. Please sign up to be a member of the Academy. Webinars themselves are free because of the financial sponsorship of individuals who provide money to sponsor a webinar. So whether that's an individual or an organization, please reach out to Marissa Waterman, our Director of Marketing, to manage those donations for webinars. We also thank our Academy patrons who support not only the webinars, but the operation of the Academy and all of our programs. Today, we're particularly excited to have a webinar that should be really valuable, not just to those attending and listening live, but to those that are listening to this as a recording. Israel and I are going to answer some questions, right? The big question is, so you want to be a PE and you want to achieve board certification, but how? We're going to give you some practical details of education, experience, examination, and continuing professional development to help you be successful and what the Academy does to support that. Some of the background summary that we put together for this is that the first professional engineering license was issued by the state of Wyoming in 1907. And just about 50 years after that, the Academy started board certification. Then it was known as Diplomates of the American Academy of Sanitary Engineering. And now we're about 70 years later. And the Academy continues to have board certification, but no longer just of environmental engineers, also of environmental scientists. And so we're going to speak to all of that. And as we summarize, we're going to do a little bit of pulling back the curtain, kind of use that Wizard of Oz metaphor. Now, that doesn't mean that credentialing and professional engineering is all smoke and mirrors. That's not what we mean by pulling back the curtain. What we mean is that it can sometimes be intimidating to those who aren't professional engineers, those who aren't board certified. It can seem a little strange to apply for something you don't fully understand. And the process can seem a little bit intimidating. And so we're trying to remove some of the mystery behind that process. Israel is a lead environmental health specialist at Rivian Automotive. He's an environmental engineer with over 10 years of experience working in the industry, government, public utilities, private consulting. He is a professional engineer and he is board certified in environmental engineering. He's a member of a number of organizations and a proud graduate of Clemson University. And Israel's going to have some opportunity to introduce himself later during our webinar. My name's Dan Other, and I'm currently the Executive Director of the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists. I'm also the immediate past president. I am also a professional engineer and board certified in environmental engineering. I'm also the first individual to simultaneously be board certified both as an environmental engineer as well as an environmental scientist. And so I have a little bit of a unique perspective to offer because I actually served as the first individual that was a board certified environmental scientist serving in the role of president of our academy. So today we're excited to be speaking with you. I'm going to actually share my screen so that we get into our slide deck here. So you want to be a PE and achieve board certification, but how? Practical details, education, experience, examination, and CPD or continuing professional development from Israel Hodges and Dan Other. We've done our little bit of welcome. We're going to get into our declaration of interest, and then Israel and I are going to do some self-introductions. We're going to review the learning objectives and then talk about board certification and the requirements therein. We're going to talk about professional engineer license and the requirements. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process for ABET and CESB, organizations that help us with accreditation on the front end with education and on the back end with continuing professional development. And then I'm going to ask Israel the very real question. Israel, how do I study for the PE exam? And hopefully he's going to ask me the very real question, Dan, how do I study for board certification? And then we'll have some moderated Q&A at the end. So let's begin with our declaration of interest. Israel provides educational consulting to those who want to pursue the PE. So he's giving this presentation as an expert who regularly helps people study for the PE, but he is not here to sell a product. He is here to share his expertise. I oversee the board certification process in my role as executive director. So I am not here to tell you that if you follow my instructions, you automatically get board certified. My declaration of interest is that as executive director, there's a process that I help oversee, but we're here to kind of pull back the curtain and help this make a little bit more sense to individuals considering this. Israel, I'm going to hand it over to you to spend a few minutes with some self-introduction, my friend.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, thanks for the invite, and happy to see all the attendees on the webinar. I'm Israel Hodges. I currently work as a lead EHS specialist for Rivian Automotive, where we manufacture various electric vehicles. I've been at Rivian now a little over a year, and at night, I do provide educational consulting for various types of training, including various examinations. So looking forward to today's discussion. Have lots of environmental engineering experiences in various fields. And one of the things that we'll focus a lot on today is how your experience in whatever aspect of engineering, including environmental engineering, is your most valuable asset. So I'm grateful to all of you because all of you attending, you are showing that you do value growth in your career as well as any educational opportunities and continuous development offered by the Academy and elsewhere. So looking forward to today's conversation.
Thanks, Israel. Appreciate that. Once again, Dan Other. I'm the executive director for the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists. I was first a PE in 2004 and then board certified in 2005. So don't let the whiteness of my beard fool you. I'm still fairly new to this gig myself. But it's amazing how quickly it can change. And we're going to get into this a little bit. I took the PE exam back when you brought in briefcases and suitcases full of paperwork and study guides. And Israel's going to let us into a lot of insight. So for those of you that are perhaps more senior, more seasoned professionals, what I would urge you to do is also pay attention to this webinar. Because when you go to give advice to perhaps more junior colleagues that are studying for the PE or considering board certification, while it is the same credential it's always been, the path to getting there has got a few twists and turns that make it a little bit different now than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And so this webinar is valuable both for those that are coaching as well as those that are considering pursuing the credential themselves. So I'm going to switch back over here and share our slides and continue to move on with our slide deck. And Israel, I'm going to hand it off to you to review our learning objectives for today.
Absolutely. So we're going to cover a good bit of information, but as far as the 4 pillars that will form today's webinar, first of all, as in all aspects of engineering, there's tons of acronyms. So we're going to cover, as it relates to the professional engineering exam, as well as the board certification exam with the Academy, the various acronyms that play a part from the point of education through the point that hopefully you pass the various exams and achieve certification, whether as a PE license or board certification. So we're going to talk about those various acronyms all throughout that process. Secondly, we're going to talk about some common pitfalls with the board certification application as it relates to the various things that the Academy requires before they approve you to become or take the exams to become board certified as an environmental engineer and or an environmental scientist. So typically the main issues that come up are documenting the wrong types of experiences, as well as applying for the wrong specialties that don't necessarily align with your career experiences. So we'll spend some time talking about that. And similar to the board certification application, we'll talk about the changes in the professional engineering process, most of which are centered around when people are allowed to take the exam. Before there were career experiences required in terms of the number of years that one would have to accrue before you're allowed to take the exam. And then secondly, the actual resources that you're allowed to use during the examination. I was actually, when I took the exam almost 10 years ago now, I was one of the last groups that was able to bring in whatever resources as far as binded books and textbooks that we were allowed to bring in. So we'll talk about some of those changes. And last but not least, talk about the educational details that are required as part of the educational experience for these certifications and how they may differ from state to state and region to region. And of course, we don't want these certifications to be the last stop of your journey, but ideally, one of the first steps you take as you progress throughout your career in terms of continuous development.
Thanks, Israel. Appreciate that. I had jumped the gun. I pushed the button a little bit too quickly, but I think you'll forgive me. So as you might imagine, when we think about the board certification requirements and we look at what's available on the Academy website, it can be a little bit overwhelming. This is actually some cut and paste from what's there on the Academy website. And I'm going to actually pause my screen share here and switch over to a screen share of a web browser and actually take a minute to drill down and make sure people understand what we're talking about when we're going to the Academy website. So if we go to aaees.org and we bring this up so that you can actually see the various menu items. Now, sometimes this website, you can see all the menu items as you have things spread out. Other times, if you're viewing this website on a device that's a little bit more narrow, those menus disappear. They're actually all there just in this little triple lines up here on the left-hand side. So remember, this website's going to look different on different kind of devices. But what we're really looking at is this tab about joining the Academy, what it is to be a member, what it is to become board certified, what it is to think about international membership. And so if I spread this out a little bit, hopefully this goes back to showing me the menu that I'm looking for. If you come to join and you come down to become board certified, we've got a number of materials about why board certification, how board certification, all the different paths. And you'll notice there is a path for those who are licensed professional engineers. There are those who are not licensed, but are working as engineers. And then there are those who are environmental scientists. So there's at least some different types of individuals that would be looking for board certification. So if I pivot back over and we go to our slide deck again, so let me make sure I'm sharing the right thing here. This slide has got everything in one place. Let's peel this onion apart a little bit and let's focus in on the process for certification via examination. That is overseen by an organization called the American Academy of Environmental Engineers Certification Board. And you might say that seems weird, Dan. I thought this was the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists. Why is there this certification board? The American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists is a membership body. You are welcome to be a member of the Academy as a student, as a young professional, as somebody retired, as somebody across the entire spectrum of your career. Membership in the Academy is not the same as board certification. And so we actually, within the Academy, have a certification board whose process it is to make sure that we maintain a roster of certified individuals known as board certified environmental engineers or scientists. And so to become a board certified environmental engineer, first and foremost, you are a person of good moral character, high ethical integrity, and high professional standing. You see, the exam is in a sense the kind of afterthought, right? The kind of the minimum floor to make sure you know what's going on. The exam, many people worry about the exam as I need to study for this exam. Actually, to be board certified, what you need to do is excel in leadership and excellence in environmental engineering and science. To be board certified, you need to have good moral character, high ethical integrity, and high professional standing. When the admissions committee is reviewing, when you're looking to take your oral and written exam, when they're making decisions by the certification board, we're looking for this comprehensive package that shows who you are. One piece of that package, for those of you that have earned a degree in engineering, is to have a degree in environmental engineering or related discipline, like civil, chemical, mechanical, electrical. You might think, well, how would folks in those other areas? Many programs in environmental engineering focused on air quality are found in mechanical engineering programs or chemical engineering programs. So it is not, well, I've just studied civil engineering, therefore I can go to the academy, or I've studied environmental engineering, I can go to the, it's environmental engineering or related. For those of you pursuing the BCEE, you need to be licensed as a professional engineer. Now, for those of you that are a PE, you know what that means. There is no US license for professional engineering. The jurisdictions for licensure is at the state level. For example, I am licensed in the state of Missouri, the state of Ohio, and the District of Columbia. That means I can practice professional engineering in those jurisdictions. You could have equivalency to professional engineering in other countries. For example, in the United Kingdom, I'm a chartered engineer, which is very similar to professional engineer here in the state of Missouri or the state of Ohio. So it is a requirement that you have a professional license or a foreign equivalent that is considered by the certification board if you're going to pursue the route of board certified environmental engineer. You need to be professionally engaged in environmental engineering on a full-time basis, and you need 8 years of full-time experience, including 4 of those years in responsible charge. Responsible charge means you're where the buck stops. Then you say, you know, well, I'm doing part of a project of a $200 million build, and the unit operation I'm doing is going to be $50 million. Well, then you're still in responsible charge of that. I'm doing a sampling campaign or running a pilot plant, and we're going to take that data and put into the larger design. You're still the responsible engineer in charge of the QA, QC of that pilot plant. So emphasize your responsible charge for at least 4 years. Now, if you happen to have 16 years of experience, that's a lot. You could request a waiver of the written exam, but you'll still need to take the oral exam, which is some peers talking with you about questions. Now let's shift gears a little bit. What if you are an environmental scientist? Now you're following the path of examination. You're talking to the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists Certification Board. Again, high moral character, ethical standards, professional standing, but now a degree in environmental science or related discipline. So things that are environmental science might be microbiology, might be limnology, might be aerosol science, might be planetary climate change. These are all areas that would be looked at. And so if you're not sure, does your degree fit, please reach out and talk to us. You need to be professionally engaged on a full-time basis for at least 8 years, with 4 of those being in responsible charge. Now, I've got a misprint here. That should say in a designated environmental science specialty, not environmental engineering specialty. Obviously, we're talking about the scientist. And again, if you have 16 years of total experience, you could request a waiver for the written exam. Now, what if you don't fall into one of those 2 paths? What if you're not seeking certification via examination? What if you're seeking certification via eminence, a fundamentally different path? If you are seeking certification via eminence as a professional engineer, or as a scientist who's worked for many years, or as an engineer who does not have a license, those are going to be the individuals that are designated as board certified environmental engineering member, or BCEEM. For all of those pathways pursuing eminence, you need an earned degree in environmental engineering or science. And here's the kicker: at least 20 years of experience, with at least 10 of those years in senior positions. Remember, we're using the word eminence here. In other words, this is not somebody who just graduated, worked for a few years. That's the examination pathway. This is the person who is graduated, worked for most of their career. They're at least mid-career, if not beyond, and they're applying based on the eminence. They must have achieved positions of leadership within their organization. They must have a record of service to the profession. They must have a record of honors and awards. They must have a record of scholarly publications. It is not a low bar for eminence. So if you're thinking, the exam seems tough, I'd rather go this eminent route. Eminence means eminence. It is a high bar. So folks that are in that early stage of career, examination, right direction to go. You start to get to that kind of later career, there's a choice for going with the examination and perhaps getting a waiver on the written exam, but still doing the oral exam, or making sure you have sufficient experience to apply via eminence. Let me just hit a few common questions. Is board certified environmental engineering member the same as member of the academy? Nope. Member, students, young professionals, people across the perspective of their career, membership in the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists is for those that have a degree in environmental engineering or science and who pay membership dues. Board certified environmental engineer member, BCEEM, is a certification credential earned through the pathway of eminence by those who do not have a license in engineering, but consider themselves engineers, have training as an engineer. I was a free student member and I'm not ready for board certification. So should I just leave the academy and wait and come back 10 years later? Nope. You should continue to be a member of the academy so that you can grow professionally. Do not walk away and come back. Just stay with us. We're going to accompany you along your career. Is all board certification the same? Nope. I am board certified in the specialty of water and wastewater. I am board certified in the specialty of environmental microbiology. If you see me out there practicing air quality, ask me, Dan, do you know what you're talking about? Because I will tell you that's not my specialty certification. So let's be really clear. Specialty certification is to a specialty. You can be certified in multiple specialties, but what we're looking for are individuals that are of high standard of practice in a specialty. Is the exam hard? I haven't been a student for a long time and I don't really have time to study. Nope, it is not designed to be hard. It is designed to make sure that you know the minimum skills to be an environmental engineer or scientist on our board certified roster. Remember, we're looking much more, in a sense, at your experience and who you are and making sure you've got minimum ability to do well on exam. So don't be put off by the exam. If you are of high moral character, if you're doing good practice, approach us. Let's look at you being board certified. What if I apply and I don't make it? Does it hurt me? Nope. If you fail our exam multiple times, we might say, hey, there's something we need to talk about here. But applying for board certification is not something that harms you. It is not designed to hurt you in some way. I'm going to turn this over to Israel.
Thanks, Dan. So as it relates to the professional engineering license process, as you mentioned earlier, it comes down to each state and or jurisdiction's requirements to apply for that license. And most states typically allow you 3 pathways to become a professional engineer. That's either by examination, by endorsement, or by reinstatement. Now, the latter two, via endorsement and reinstatement, those are fairly straightforward due to the fact that those pathways are for those who have either they have licensure in another state, or they have licensure, but for whatever reason let it go, they let it expire or go inactive, and now they want to come out of retirement or return back to practice. So the bulk of our conversation will focus on the examination route, as that's the route that most people will take to become a professional engineer. So when we're talking about the examination route, there are 4 key requirements that must be met in order to be approved to take the professional engineering exam to receive licensure. So the first one is education. The expectation for most states is that you are a graduate from an ABET accredited engineering program, either a bachelor's degree most of the time and some master's degree. And I'll speak a little more on that in a second. Secondly, the ABET, the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, have different accreditation boards, and it's expected that to become a professional engineer, that your education is received from a accredited program that's been approved by the Engineering Accreditation Board, or EAC for short. One of the things that come up as far as common questions is specifically, can someone with an engineering technology degree be approved to take the professional engineering exam? So the answer is it depends. So if someone only has that engineering technology degree, based simply upon the fact that they are not approved, that program is not approved by the EAC, it's approved by another board under ABET, they are not allowed to take the PE exam based off of that degree alone. However, if someone does not have these educational requirements met, they can apply to the NCEES, the National Council of Examiners for Engineers and Scientists, the creators of the PE exam, to ask that their educational resume be evaluated. And depending on what those requirements are, the NCEES may decide to approve or deny those requirements based on the education that they obtain. So just wanted to clarify that in terms of the engineering technology degrees. Second and third, these are the various examinations that are required to be passed. First of all is the Fundamentals of Engineering examination, often called the FE exam for short. This is, you will often get approved to take this following graduation from that ABET accredited program, or you have senior standing within that degree program. Essentially, you're about to graduate soon. So your state or jurisdiction will allow you to go ahead and take this exam. Similar to the PE exam, you will register with the NCEES to be approved to take the exam. And then after passing the FE exam and graduating from your ABET accredited degree program, you will apply with your state or jurisdiction to receive your engineer in training certification, or called EIT certification for short. Third, where we get to the bread and butter of the PE exam, or Professional Principles and Practice of Engineering exam. Similar to the FE exam, you will fill out an application with the NCEES, and provided you meet the requirements, you will be approved to sit for the exam, and then you will apply with your state. That once you pass the exam, you will receive your PE license. So, and last but not least, similar to the board certification process, there is a morality and ethics portion of the licensure application as well. It's, of course, key to make sure that you meet the educational and the exam requirements. But when you become a professional engineer, the state or jurisdiction that you decide to work in is entrusting you that you will uphold the standards of whatever PE specialty that you will be applying for. So some states will differ in terms of the number of references, on what qualifications those references will need. But most of the references will need to answer to who you are as a person, your work ethic, how you handle yourself as a professional, and all that will be involved in the application process. So similar to what Dan said, it's important that it's not only what's in your head in terms of knowledge, but just making sure that you're a great decision maker and that you will always act in an ethical manner when it comes to the engineering discipline. So some common questions. Are all states the same? Yes and no. So most states will have similar requirements in terms of education, the various exams, as well as the references that you'll have to file in terms of what those references are asked about you professionally and personally. Some states may have extra requirements. A common example is that there are some PE specialties that aren't acknowledged in certain states compared to others. So it's important that whenever you decide to apply for the PE exam, if there's a certain specialty that you're leaning towards applying for, based on your career experiences, it's important that you look into whether your state acknowledges that specialty as it relates to the state that you want to apply for the license in. Secondly, you work with someone who has a PE license. Can you just simply work under them? So this is a common refrain that comes up not only in the academy, but the professional realm as well. Licensure is not indicative of how knowledgeable or how smart you are, but licensure is an indication to the world of how seriously you take your discipline, your engineering discipline that you work within, and how seriously you take your career. So we always recommend to people, if you have the opportunity to get not just the PE or board certification licensures, it always works best for your career long term. And it also shows a seriousness to the people that you work with, that if someone is relying upon your services, that because you have those licenses and certifications behind your name, that you take your craft seriously and that you will always uphold it to the best of your ability. So we always strongly recommend people that if you can get those licenses or certifications, please do so. Third question, are all PEs the same? So I've mentioned several times that there are different specialties, and most states, once you pass the PE exam, as well as the other requirements for your specific discipline, most states do not certify you under that specialty. They only certify you as a professional engineer. Now, saying that, it's important that you only use your professional engineering licensure in the areas of your expertise. But as far as the state is concerned, once you're a professional engineer, you're labeled as such. But depending on your work experiences, you may apply under a certain specialty. Fourth, is the exam hard? You may not have prepared for an exam in a long time. You don't feel comfortable with what you should study. The short answer is yes. It is a difficult exam simply because it's practice based. And essentially, you are taking the exam as a professional engineer, and you're being asked questions about certain designs, certain methods, certain applications, and you're using your professional judgment to provide commentary on whatever scenario the question is posing. But as with all exams, if you prepare properly, you invest the proper time, you know what things you're being um, tested on, it will be worth it as far as taking the exam. And once you get that passing notification, it'll be one of the best feelings in the world. Yep, raise the roof. And then lastly, what if I apply and I don't make it? Does that hurt me? So typically across disciplines, there are some disciplines that have higher passing rates than others, but typically most professionals pass the professional engineering exam, 60 to 70% of them on the first attempt. So that goes to show you, if you tend to put in and invest the time, the effort, reviewing the proper materials and resources that will be covered on the exam, you have a great chance of passing. But if you don't pass on the first try, it's not the end of the world, and it won't necessarily be a mark that's visible to anyone outside of yourself and who you decide to tell that information to. Most states, in terms of requirements, once you get to that third time and you're not successful with passing the exam, you may have to provide some additional recommendations, additional notices as to what may be some potential roadblocks for you, and provide that to your state or jurisdiction that you're applying in. But other than that, no one will ever know, or won't be documented openly, how many times it takes you to pass the exam.
Perfect. Thanks, Israel. Appreciate that. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit. We've reviewed board certification, reviewed professional engineering. I'm going to hit at a quick and high level ABET for education and CESB for CPD. These are acronyms you're going to hear. They're part of this alphabet soup, and we're going to make sure that you at least know them. There's no requirement to learn these, but it is helpful to understand where things come from. And then we're going to get to the serious question like, Israel, how do I study? So ABET was originally known as the Engineering Council for Professional Development, right? You can see where professional development's all tied through from beginning to end. In the 90s, it was known as the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology. Of course, it's no longer just engineering and technology. So now it's ABET Inc., and it has multiple boards. In fact, actually, there's a board of directors and a board of delegates that come from various professional societies. There's commissions that manage the accreditation. There's multiple advisory councils. But most importantly for us is to understand that environmental engineering programs at the baccalaureate master's level get reviewed by members of the academy who go out and do visits called program evaluators, and we give reports back, and then a commission sets and makes a decision. The Engineering Accreditation Commission approves environmental engineering degrees. The Engineering Technology Accreditation Commission, or ETAC, approves environmental engineering technology degree programs. And ANSAC, Applied Natural Science Accreditation Commission, approves environmental science accredited programs. And so we send out different individuals to help ABET do this process. They write reports, and then this commission makes a decision about whether the program is accredited or not. You as a student want to be aware of this, because if you get a degree from a program that's not accredited, you'll create a hang up for yourself in applying for the credentials, the license later on. So ABET accreditation matters a lot to programs so that their graduates are eligible for licensure and certification. Now, if we just hit this at a very high level, if someone's going in and looking at a program, what's included? There's what's called the program educational objectives. What a graduate can do 5 years from now. And there's student outcomes, what you study during the 4 years. There's this process of continuous improvement, and there's the curriculum. There's the student details, the faculty details, facilities. And there's all this stuff that a program evaluator is looking at. But bottom line is they're looking particularly for details about the student outcomes, what you've learned in 4 years, and the curriculum, how it gets you there. And you're not going to be surprised when you see these. Solve complex problems, apply design, communicate, ethics and responsibility, work on teams, do experiments, acquire new knowledge. We would expect students in engineering and science to do those kinds of things. What do we look for in the curriculum? 30 semester hours of math and basic science, 45 semester hours of engineering topics, a broad curriculum that all culminates in a major engineering design experience. Nothing here that should seem unusual to those that have studied engineering. To those that have studied science, it's a different commission, ANSAC instead of EAC, but as you might imagine, what they're looking for is almost the same. In addition, environmental engineering programs have to do math through differential equations, probability and statistics, physics, chemistry with stoichiometry, equilibrium, everything on here you would expect environmental engineers to know. Materials and energy balances, fate and transport, hands-on lab experiments, design systems with sustainability, life cycle, environmental impacts. Nothing here. Now, the reason why I'm going over this is because the PE exam is written knowing that this is what you studied. So it's important to look at what you thought you studied when you're looking ahead to what they're going to test you on. The test is written to the students who have done this work. Environmental science, the program prepares graduates to apply knowledge of chemistry, physics, biology, earth science, calculus, and statistics, all of those. So the board certification exam is going to be written to make sure that students can do all of these things. So the question is, do you think that there'll be a statistics test, a question on there? Probably, because it's a and. Do you think there'd be some earth sciences on there? Probably, because there's a and. At the other end, CESB, the Council of Engineering and Science Specialty Boards, they're an independent, voluntary body that the Academy submits to. We provide our information to CESB. We've been doing that for many years. They've been around since 1990, and they help coordinate specialty certifications. Our BCEE is accredited with CESB. Our BCEEM is accredited with CESB, and our BCES is accredited with CESB. You, as a member of the Academy on our board certified roster, can rest assured that the Academy is doing its job to make sure that you are being audited for continuing professional development. Randomly every year, about 10% of our members get a little notice that says, hey, please fill out what you've done the last couple of years in terms of CPD. And we take those seriously to make sure members are continuing to grow and learn. So ABET on the front end to write the degree information, and CESB on the back end to make sure you're staying current are partners along with what the Academy is doing. Now, let's pivot and get into some detail. So Israel, you know, my friend, like I said, 2004, I passed this PE exam. I did well. I studied long and hard for it. I actually enjoyed it. I'm one of those goofy people that enjoyed studying for a test. But let's say you're not one of those people. I mean, what's it look like? How do I study? How do I study for the PE?
Absolutely. So when I discuss this with other professionals, typically there's lots of advice you can find on the internet, social media, Reddit. But when you boil it all down, there's typically 4 tenets that everything centers around. So we've talked a lot about going to the source of the information, whether it's the organizations that review these exams, proctor them, the people that set up the accreditation boards. So the first tip I tell folks is to simply go to the NCEES website. That is at ncees.org. And for the specific exam, that you have applied to take, whether it's environmental, whether it's civil, whether it's electrical or mechanical, the NCEES has listed an exam specification page that you can click on the website, and it will show you the typical breakdown of the exam. Doing that first step is important because it establishes the boundaries of the exam for you. As most engineering fields, the information is vast, but that spec page or two, it breaks down the topics that will be covered on the exam and the typical number of questions that will be allotted to each major area as well as each sub area. So that is helping you get a firm grasp on, hey, it seems like a lot of information, but for most exams, it will be 80 questions, or some other exams, maybe more or less. So that's essentially the first step that I provide to people. The second tenet is really just to calm down. Hey, you're not learning the whole exam from scratch, because as I mentioned at the beginning, the most valuable asset you have is your own personal experiences. Now, all of us, even those working in the same field, we have different experiences, whether it's different fields within our environmental sector, whether it's different employers we work with, different industries. Those unique experiences that you've had, whether it's over a 5-year career or a 35-year career, those are going to form your core competencies. So comparing those core competencies with the list that's shown on the exam specifications page, that is essentially going to be your foundation. So when you begin preparing for the exam, you won't have to learn everything from scratch, because the things that serve as your core competencies, those are the things that you have unique and in-depth experiences with. So just knowing that as your core competencies, that takes the number from, hey, I don't know anything, to, hey, I actually feel comfortable with 20% of the exam or 40% of the exam based on what those competencies are. So very important that second step, you realize that you're not starting from zero. The third tenet is essentially coming up with your study plan. So along with your core competencies, you're going to take those competencies along with whatever items there will be the most problems for on the exam. So for example, the environmental PE exam, the majority of that exam is made up of water topics: wastewater, stormwater, drinking water issues, etc. So once you form those three things that you really need to focus your study plan on, it will be actually creating the things you need to look at. Now, in terms of any exam, as it relates to the PE exams, you will typically have 4 types of questions that you will be asked to answer or make selections of. There will typically be math and science applications that you will have to use some equation, use some scientific principles to answer or make a comment or an observation about a scenario that's posing a problem. The second will be a conceptual or definition that you're asked to respond to. So it's important that you not just focus on solving actual problems or using equations, but you actually do reading. Most of us in our fields, we're required to read various things, whether there's textbooks, guides, references, whatever the case may be. And that will also serve as part of your study plan. The third aspect will be regulatory review. So as engineers, a lot of what we do is regulated and or mandated by some jurisdiction on a local, state, or federal level. So something that's often overlooked when putting together a study plan is actually reviewing those regulatory statutes, because within those statutes, they will list various specs that we as engineers and scientists need to be aware of whenever we're designing systems, because that's what the PE exam we'll focus on the design of systems and analyzing them to ensure that they're working properly for the protection of whatever field we're working in, mechanical integrity, electrical safety, or the environment for the PE exam. And then the fourth tenet, once you come up with that study plan, it's consistently executing that plan and then setting some periodic set points, whether it's halfway through your study plan, a third of the way through, 2/3 of the way through, just to make sure that you actually feel comfortable with the amount of information that you're that the retention of that information feels good to you, and that you're progressing in a way that makes you more and more comfortable with taking the exam. Now, some people will put certain timelines on, oh, you should study a minimum of 8 weeks. You should study a minimum of 3 months. And whatever you set for your study time regarding how you execute your study plan, that's up to you. Just speaking from personal experience, I felt I prepared a little too hard. And actually, when I got to about a month from taking the exam, I felt burnt out. So I actually had to take some time, just a mental break. And then once I took that week and a half off, I was able to come back and really tighten up all the concepts and various things that I learned throughout my execution of my study plan. And
Now,
going
Israel,
back to,
do I just bring in like the whole suitcase of books and all that stuff, or because that
so
makes me feel so much safer if I had a whole suitcase?
so thanks for mentioning that. That actually leads to my tip. So I mentioned the 4 tenets, and the last one is my tip that I give everyone. When I took the exam, as well as you, Dan, we had whatever textbooks, references we had. We filled up our banker's boxes. We got some dollies from an uncle or a grandfather, and us, along with everyone else we were taking the test with within our state, we wheeled it in. And as we're taking the exam, we're going through different references, and that in of itself, it was almost a second exam, because the test was essentially, hey, do you know where to find this specific reference or this specific notation that this question is asking? Well, for most exams today, they are closed book, and the only resource or 2 resources that you're allowed to bring with you are your NCEES approved calculator, as well as the handbook for your specific PE exam. So the tip that I give everyone that I talk to about getting prepared for the PE exam, from day one of executing your study plan, you need to have whatever calculator you're planning to use on the exam, as well as a copy of that handbook. And you need to get comfortable and effective using those tools, because they're the only tools that you have on the exam. It's like building a large building, but you only have a hammer and a crowbar. Now, they may not necessarily be the most effective tools, and if it was up to you, you would maybe choose 2 other tools to use. However, with those being the only tools that you have at your disposal, it's important that as you're solving problems, even regulatory concepts as you review them, that you're comfortable using your calculator and your handbook, because surprisingly to some, the handbook does have a lot of regulatory applications cited in the handbook, as well as listed. So even for those problems, the handbook is a valuable resource. So you definitely don't want exam day to be the first day that you're perusing through pages 100 through 120 because you have a certain type of question, and that's the section. Those are the pages assigned to that section. So as a tip, get comfortable with your calculator as well as the handbook for your specific PE exam. And typically, it's not 100%, but most people who follow those steps, and most importantly, they're comfortable and they feel good about the action plan that they've set up, tend to be successful. when taking the PE exam.
Perfect. I was going to say, so honestly, when I took the test, it was interesting because I actually used for the PE the same study guide I used for the board certification exam. So back to this Academy website, under this section where it says join and become board certified, I just wanted to highlight for everybody that's thinking about the PE, but then thinking about board certified environmental engineer, board certified environmental scientist. If you scroll down through here, you will actually notice the Academy has got some need assistance with the examination. Here's some resources. So there is actually a really handy couple 100-page hardback book that the Academy has put together that you can then get an electronic version. And to make things easier for you, as a little bit of a teaser, the table of contents and the first couple of chapters are posted up here as a PDF. The guidelines that we use for the oral exam are posted up here as a PDF. And just as an example, as Israel pointed out, we're not all water and wastewater. There's air and there's solid waste and there's all of these other areas, and there's environmental microbiology and chemistry and hazardous waste and remediation. But to give you a teaser of what this is like, some guidance for those looking at the specialty of water and wastewater are posted. And so what I would encourage you to do, take Israel's approach to kind of the PE as you transition into thinking about board certified's exam. Look at what materials are here. And what I would share with you, and this is just the Dan version, I did the PE in 2004 and I did the board certification in 2005. And I actually used the board certification materials to study for my environmental PE. So Israel, full disclosure, I was the one person without the bank boxes. I literally came in with just the Academy's study guide for board certification, and it served me very well. And so just things to be thinking about, right? I think, as Israel pointed out, we can get worried that we've got to go back and relearn everything from our degree. That's not what these exams are about.
And two other points that I will add to what you just said, Dan. Oftentimes when the exam was open book, we just thought, oh, we have to get every book that we can get our hands on. And oftentimes those aren't necessarily valuable, especially if during our study plan we don't use them. And that leads to my a question that I often get is essentially, what references or textbooks do I recommend people purchase other than the actual handbook? And the correct answer is it depends on your study plan. If there's a topic that you are preparing for and you feel that your current resources, which most of us, just based on our experiences, have accumulated references and guidebooks just to do our daily jobs. If there's something that you're studying that you're not receiving the proper depth that you feel comfortable with, I would suggest then looking into some various references and textbooks. But otherwise, if you feel good about your study plan, there shouldn't be any pressure on your part to, oh, I have to get a textbook in every single topic that's covered on the exam, because that in of itself will put some added pressure on you to feel that you need to be addressing every single topic to a textbook level. So just wanted to point those two things out.
Absolutely. You're not going to cram 4 years of a degree into 3 months of studying.
Absolutely.
So we've got answers to these. We're gonna get ready to move to our Q&A, but let's just review. We've covered some acronyms, right? So we've covered what do we mean by PE and BC. We've covered ABET, NCEES, CESB, and CPD. We've covered the acronyms. We've talked about some of these common pitfalls. Do not equate membership in the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists with board certification. Don't conflate those two. They're different things. Make sure that you are focusing on the right kind of experience, moral character, ethical ability, knowledge in your discipline. That's the kind of stuff that should come through in spades. It should be there super obvious on your application for a license or on your application for board certification. We've gone through the difference between the PE process then and now, and Israel, fantastic advice. Boy, it sounds like it's kind of a straightforward thing compared to the good old days, but you know, each system's good and bad. And then be sure that you appreciate those educational details about your prior experience. Think about what you've learned, and then think about your continuing professional education to stay current. So that's what we were trying to cover today. Hopefully, we've gotten those things across to you. Israel, I'm going to pivot over and take a quick glance at some of the PE and bounce these questions off of you, or look at the Q&A and bounce some of these off of you and kind of get your can I get the PE handbook through NCES website? Where do I get that PE handbook?
Yes. So whenever you apply for the exam, the NCES will require you to set up a My NCES account. And through that account, you will be able to obtain the handbook for your specific PE specialty and get that free of charge. So yes.
Israel, you know, I went to go take the exam, but I couldn't bring in my own handbook, right? So when I go to physically be in the exam, what do I actually physically bring with me? And what am I going to actually physically see there? Because somebody said, you know, it looks like, yeah, but I can't bring in my own open copy, which kind of makes sense, right? You might have crib notes in there. So what's it feel like on the day?
Absolutely. So on test day, the only thing that you can bring with you to use during the exam is your identification and your calculator, provided that it is an approved model by NCEES. A copy of the handbook, as well as a writing utensil and scratch paper, will be provided to you at the test center.
So don't bring anything other than game day brain power ready to go. So
absolutely.
You know, Israel, I struggled on the regulatory questions during my PE and environmental. Do you have any material that you might suggest that would help with that? My friends have asked me about it, but we haven't found what exactly we should focus on the regulatory materials.
I actually would start at the EPA's website on epa.gov. And well, let me walk that back. Depending on what PE specialty you are planning to take the exam for, there's typically a federal agency that essentially regulates the various regulatory statutes for that specific field. I would start at that regulatory agency's federal website, and then they typically have good short and long presentations regarding the various regulations that govern that specific field. So, for example, for environmental engineering, you typically have the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act as two examples. So from there, that will be the majority of your regulatory questions. And the EPA has lots of great guides. Some, if you want, hey, I just need a 10-minute overview, they have those available on their website. Or, hey, I want some good nighttime reading. They have those available as well. And you can always refer to the federal Code of Federal Regulations. They have an electronic website. So when you're reviewing various guides, you can jot down what those regulatory citations are, and you can simply type those in Google, and it will pop up and list the various requirements under that citation.
Perfect. Now, here's a question that's going to kind of be for both of us, and we may each want to take it in turns, or maybe I'll jump in, and if you've got you want to elaborate. But
okay,
you know, so maybe I got a degree beyond my bachelor's, and how does extra schooling count towards my experience? And this matters both for the PE and the board certification, right? So that PE is 4 years of work experience before you can take it, or before you can go after the license. You can take the test earlier, but you have to wait 4 years to go out. 8 years before you can even try the test for board certification. The specific rules are posted with each jurisdiction. So always go to the jurisdiction to be sure you're looking at the right rules. Different jurisdictions have different rules, slight differences. So that would be my first advice. In terms of the academy, right? It's all posted online, but the way to think about it, right, is that you've got to be doing this 8 years of time working as an environmental engineer, environmental science. Your master's degree counts towards a year and a half, and then your PhD can count towards a year and a half. So then you still need 5 more years. So if you're thinking about somebody like me as an academic that got my master's and then got my PhD, and then I worked for 5 years as an assistant professor, the first I was kind of eligible was about 5 years after I had been an assistant professor. So I got my bachelor's degree in 95, and then my master's a couple years later, and my PhD a couple years later, and worked as a professor for 5 years before I took the exam. And I explained how, as a professor, I directed a research lab, and therefore that put me in responsible charge. And so I could show time in responsible charge. Israel, maybe you want to talk to your own experience about what you did for the PE and the board certified, just to give people an example.
Absolutely. So I got a master's degree in environmental engineering. And when I initially registered for my PE license in the state of South Carolina, the state of South Carolina reduces that 4-year work requirement for the PE license. For a master's degree, they reduce it by 1 year. And I think at the time for a PhD, they reduced it by 18 to 24 months. But I don't think they allowed you to count both together. So I think the max that you could reduce that work time from 4 years was about 2 years. But from state to state, it will vary. I don't think it's specialty specific. I just think across the board. But most states, for a master's degree, it'll be 6 to 12 months that they reduce that time. And for a PhD, they will reduce it 18 to 24 months.
And then afterwards, you then worked for a few years. So how did you document responsible charge as you were going for your board certification?
Yeah. So I think the key thing was what I tried to do when I worked for various employers was just my manager just document the projects that I was responsible for. And of course, I'll document those things as well. And then when I got to applying for the board certification with the academy, just have those projects and state how I was responsible for the various aspects of that project. And I felt that will help make your experience and what you're responsible for much clearer. Because oftentimes people will put, oh, I worked on such and such. And it's okay. Well, lots of people worked on it. What did you do? How did you contribute? So I definitely think that's what the academy is looking for when you get to applying for board certification.
And in particular, and how were you in charge, right? In other words,
Yeah.
How did the buck stop with you? There was a question, can you be certified, board certified in multiple areas? Absolutely. You can take multiple exams. You will need to have experience in each of those areas. So you can't, like, let's say you've designed a wastewater plant, so that's going to be the water wastewater area. You can't say, oh, well, by the way, I went the hazardous waste specialization. You've got to show that you've worked for 8 years with 4 years responsible charge in hazardous waste if you want the hazardous waste certification. So just to be clear, it is quite a challenge to be board certified in any area. It's particularly a challenge to be board certified in multiple areas. And just to be really clear, you don't get board certification in the area you'd like to move to. You get board certification to document your experience in an area where you've already worked. And that's the purpose of board certification. I got a really great detailed question. I recently became a BCEEM. I'm planning on taking the PE. Can I then convert that over to the BCEE? Part of ethics is that I have to admit when I know and don't know the answer. I've never had that question. It's a fantastic question. Please follow up via email so that I can get you an answer to that. Seems like a reasonable thing to do. We never want the M on the BCEEM to seem like it's a negative, right? It is, there are plenty of people, particularly in environmental engineering, that were not at an ABET accredited bachelor's degree, especially 10 to 20 years ago. those people should still be able to be board certified environmental engineers. But we do have to recognize the difference between those with the PE license and those without. So BCEEM is not in any way meant to seem like anything other than a recognition of engineers who were not able to pursue the license pathway because they either lack the education to be able to pursue that. Somewhere in their record, although they are clearly an engineer, they didn't do everything that was necessary with a professional engineering license, so therefore can't do the board certified environmental engineer. That said, if you are eligible to take the PE, I would strongly recommend it. And I do point out to people, there is a difference between board certification as a credential and professional engineer as a license. While they both require, good moral character and expert knowledge, there are legal differences between certifications and license. And so be very sure that you understand what those obligations are when you have a license in a jurisdiction versus what is the benefit of having a certification that has a national platform. Israel, don't know if you want to answer that a little bit as well.
Well, no, that was perfect. And to add on to your answer, Dan, any questions or any ambiguous aspects of licensure, always feel free to reach out to your state licensing board. Oftentimes I don't want to ask that question. It's a stupid question. But a lot of the folks there, they have decades of experience upon answering similar questions to what you have, specifically to those who may have gotten degrees from different schools. You may have gotten a degree from a school outside of the US, but got an advanced degree here in the US. They are very great at answering those questions and providing you with the best pathway to get the PE licensure. And that's why I mentioned earlier, if the state recommends it to you, using the evaluation program that the NCEES has, if you feel that you're not quite sure if you meet certain educational requirements.
Wonderful. Well, Israel, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to do this one together. All participants, thank you so much. There will be forthcoming a CPD certificate coming from Marissa and the Academy. Once again, thank you for joining. We do have future webinars scheduled. Please do check the Academy website, and we look forward to seeing you at a future program. Israel, thanks again, my friend.
Thanks, Dan, for the opportunity.